Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the SumoSprings rear helper Jounce bumpers on a 2024 Chevy Silverado 1500. Adding SumoSprings Jounce bumpers to your truck is such a great option to be able to get a comfortable ride, yet when you load it down with weight, you're not going to have a whole lot of squat as you would with your factory bump stops. And the reason being is it just closes up that gap between the frame of the vehicle and the strike plate on the axle. So this is going to do a number of different things. When you have weight on your truck and it does squat, generally your suspension is not able to get full stroke because it's squatted down. So that can prematurely wear out your suspension, but also that translates to a little bit lighter steering feel, a little less braking. Your headlight height can also go up a little bit in the front as well, and just kind of make for an experience where it just feels like it's dragging something behind it, where supplementing the suspension with something like a SumoSpring really brings it back to a good level height, and it just makes the vehicle feel a little bit more confident when pulling, and that the factory suspension can still handle that. Now, with that being said, these are rated at a 1,000-pound capacity. You're not going to gain any additional capacity or pulling, but it's going to be able to support that amount of weight. Now, you can get this in a number of different capacities, and it really comes down to what you're using your truck for. If you're just towing a small camper or a light trailer, these are going to be a great option. And as you step up to higher loads, just account for that weight. And you know, this is something that's really going to just pay off long term because there's no maintenance required, and once you install them, they're ready to go. But saving your suspension and getting better driving feel when towing is something that you're going to feel every single time you use it, and that's why I'm a huge fan of these. These are made of a durable microcellular urethane, so that means they're going to hold up long term. So temperatures aren't going to be an issue. You can go from -25 up to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. It's also going to, you know, any road grime, oils, salts, UV, anything like that, it's not going to break these down. And not only are you going to make this better for towing, but also this acts as a little bit of sway control. It's not necessarily a sway bar, but as your frame leans one side to the other, as these make contact, it's going to keep the vehicle a little bit more flat, so it will reduce a little bit of body roll while driving. Now, these are also progressive, so as you add weight to it, whether it's a light load, it's going to be able to account for that, but as you put heavier loads, these will get progressively stronger to account for that. So that way, you know, you don't have adjustability like airbags, but the progressive nature of these kind of acts like that. I think the biggest pro of the SumoSprings is not only just the ride quality, but the ease of installation. Whereas airbags, it's a little bit more intense. It's not hard to do, but these simply, you just take a floor jack, raise up the rear of your vehicle, unbolt your old ones, put your new ones in, and that's it. So super easy to do in your driveway or garage. In probably about 15 minutes, you can have these installed, and you're gonna notice the difference immediately. Now, to get your SumoSprings installed, it's super easy, but you do need to raise the rear of the vehicle to get that suspension to be unsprung. It's going to open up the window of being able to slip in our new SumoSprings. So chalk the front tires. We're on a lift, so I'm going to be using a trans jack, but if you're doing this at home, not to worry, you can just put a floor jack on your rear hitch and raise it up. You don't need the tires off the ground. You just want that suspension to open up as much as possible. And the Sumos are going to be replacing our factory Jounce bumpers, so we obviously need to get these removed. And it's going to be just a 10mm socket that you'll need probably a small extension or a deep well here in combination to be able to get access to that bolt. So we'll get these knocked loose and remove our factory Jounce bumpers. Side by side with the factory Jounce bumper versus our new Sumos, you see a massive difference. And what that's going to account for is the amount of sag that's going to be reduced immediately, because in order for a truck to bottom out on the bump stops or Jounce bumpers, it's going to take a decent amount. You know, it looks to be about, what, 3 or 4 inches here to where that finally has to bottom out. This is going to engage quite a bit quicker, which is great because it's not going to allow the truck to sag. So definitely a big difference, and that's immediately going to cut down on any of that sag because it's going to engage quicker. But also the Sumos, I really like these because they're relatively soft, But as you put more and more pressure, they become progressively stronger. That way, if you have a heavy load, it'll count for that. But also, that means when you are just hitting small bumps, just normally driving, it's not super aggressive when it does make contact. And so it's not as jarring of a ride as one may think. Now, not exactly a scientific test, but just to kind of give you a visual, here's your factory Jounce bumper, and I'm just going to use one hand on a vise and see how much I can get it to squish down. So even once it makes contact with the strike plate, there's still a decent amount of squish that you can do with weight. So this is about max of what I can do with one hand. Let's put the Sumo in and see the difference. Now with our SumoSprings, I'll do the same test. And it's pretty soft in the beginning, but as I start to add more pressure, it is already getting tighter. And that's about the best I can do. So while this one was compressed down to about 1.5 inches, this one clearly there's quite a bit of a larger gap. So again, that's just going to be less movement from your factory suspension. This one's nearly double that, even when compressed. So again, these make a huge difference just soaking up that void. Now, if you have a Trail Boss or an AT4 model, you're going to have a bump stop riser on the top of the axle. So if that's the case, you're going to want to remove that. And that kind of brings me to the point of the spacer on our Sumo. So you're always going to use this flat washer, but the spacer that's included will give you an additional inch of preload, which is really nice if you really plan on pulling a lot, or if you have a truck that's slightly lifted. That's a great way to close up that gap. But we have this still opened up, and I think once I lower this down, this thing's going to be bottomed out. And ideally, when you're putting your Sumos in place, you want about 1/2 inch right above the strike plate if possible. That way, as you're just normally driving, it's just not always compressed. So that's where you're going to determine on your vehicle if you're going to use the spacer. On today's, we are not. Now, since we decided we're not going to be using our spacer, you'll find that there's 4 bolts total in the kit. The longer ones are going to account for that spacer, so we'll be using the shorter ones today. They also include thread locker, so we're going to be putting that in place. And these washers are going to be at the top portion where it threads in, and our bolt's going to just feed through here on the bottom. So what I like to do is get this dropped in. That way you're not fighting it underneath the truck. And we'll eventually be using a 17mm socket to get this tightened down. So you can use the 17 to push that through, get your washer in place, and then just make sure you have an extension that extends past the bottom of the Sumo. That way when we put this up, we can just thread this on and tighten it down. So while we have that thread sticking out, we'll put some thread locker on here. And then we're just going to put this back in the factory location and get it snugged down. So we'll put this up, get this threaded, and then we are going to snug this down. We're going to come back with a torque wrench. You don't need to get too crazy here, just enough to where we've drawn that bolt in. The torque settings are going to be found in your instruction manual. So we'll just get this torqued down. And I found that if you use a 3-inch extension with a deep socket, that's going to be your best bet, because as you can see, it's pretty tight here. So I can separate this pretty easily by just having my extension. I can push the socket up and then drop that out. So you've officially installed the one side. All that's left to do is get your other SumoSpring in place. With both of our Sumos installed and torqued down properly, we could lower down our vehicle, and then we can take a look and see the gap or the reduction in gap that we have against our strike plate. With these dropped down all the way, you can see I got about a finger's width of gap, which is what we were looking for. So all that's left to do is take out our truck, hook up some weight to it, and see the difference it makes. And that was a look and installation of the SumoSprings rear helper Jounce bumpers on a 2024 Chevy Silverado 1500.